Hey, question. Yeah, I've been looking at the numbers and I think people want you to make another diorama.
Really? I don't know. I thought last week's video kind of did great. It was, the wet palette and the tips, and I thought it was pretty well received.
Yeah, no, I had people reach out to me personally saying that they'd prefer a desert diorama, actually. Yep, a desert diorama, huh? That's what they said. A desert diorama, maybe set in an apocalyptic situation. A desert one, actually. We could toss some infected minis in there. Ooh, we could also have some soldiers defending it. Editor Samuel, are you wanting me to make a desert diorama? Because it seems like that's kind of what you're hinting at here. I think it's what the people would want. Yeah. What's good, mini crafters? My name is Samuel, and we'll be starting this project off with some good old XPS foam. The green kind, because screw the blue or pink kind. I'm going to be building up 4 layers of foam and gluing all of those together. After hot gluing all the pieces together, I'm then going to be using my handheld hot wire foam cutter to line the edges up so it's all flat and not woogity. From there, I have my main shape, but I want to add some horizontal stone layer texture to the foam. I'm going to be using my hobby knife to make a ton of slashes and cuts in the foam. Then I'm using my fingers to break slivers off and shred that up more. I did this on a larger scale in my Dwarven Mine Entrance video, which I'll have in the upper right hand corner and down in the description below if you want to check that out. With the horizontal stone layer texture added, I take my hot wire foam cutter tool, but this time I have a thin rod attachment on it. I'm going to work to cut out the entrance to the mine itself. This can create bad fumes that you do not want to breathe in, so be sure that you're doing this in a well-ventilated space or have a fan running like I do. After I have the mine entrance done, I want to create some interest in the base layer of foam prior to placing any buildings or mine accessories. To do this, I once again take my hot wire foam cutter and I carve up the foam so it's a bit more organic in shape and not so blocky. Later on, I'm going to be putting down some terrain paste to fill in cracks and create some ground texture that looks more natural. With the land shaped how I want, I'm going to start adding the structures to the diorama. First, I glue down a flat piece of balsa wood to act as a base platform for the upper area. Then, I take what is a support piece from a past 3D print of mine. I was going to toss this in the trash like you normally do with 3D printing supports, but I decided to keep it and cure it. I'm using this here as sort of a metal cage support thing. Yeah, that's right. That's the technical, professional hobby term. Support cage thing. After gluing that down, I add some wooden planks on top. This is going to help to create the sense that the survivors manning this outpost have sort of made recent modifications to the structure. Of course, I used my wire brush to add some wood grain texture to each plank prior to gluing them down. As I moved down to the ground level, I decided to add some more of that cured 3D printed support material to the side of the hill that I made. I'm imagining this as some sort of retaining wall that's holding some loose earth in place. Now, I'm sort of working in each layer of the diorama as I go up and down. I'm kind of jumping around. There's not necessarily a specific flow to where I go from place to place. Instead, I'm focusing on getting the main blocks in, like the platforms and what have you, before I go back and add the details. After getting the retaining wall in place, I add a little wooden platform, and on top of that, I place an oil drum. From that, I take a bit of old sprue I have, and I glue that to the front, leading down into the ground to act as some sort of pipe. I then jump over to the mine entrance, and I cut up some balsa wood into wooden planks to go across the top of the mine entrance. I drop down some tacky glue, and then because I'm just this cool, I use my tweezers to scoop up all the planks and place them down at the same time. Pfft, you think I'm going to place them one at a time? Ha! Now, in the sense of saving time and making my life easier, I want to make the little railroad that will come out of the mine entrance. And rather than try to hold the brass rods in place while also trying to glue down the wooden railroad tracks, I place down some double-sided tape on my desk to hold the brass rails in place exactly where I want them. I'm then placing each plank approximately equidistant from the last. Once this is dry, I'm going to place this in the mouth of the mine entrance. With the tracks down, I want to move over to the right side of the scene and work on those platforms. Again, I'm looking to create the feeling that the survivors at this outpost have made their own additions to the already existing structure. The green foam here is acting as the earth, and in order for the survivors to get up to the upper levels, I want to make some platforms, stairs, and ledges that are built into that earth, so that they can get up to the upper levels. I start by adding some beams to the ground, and then I place this 2-layer platform on top. From there, I'm going to add a little platform up by the oil drum on the second level. Once the platform is done, I've got to create a way to get from the lower platform up to the upper ones by the oil drum. This is going to take the form of some simple stairs. I take a piece of wood and etch some divots and edges into it. From there, I'm going to glue down some thin balsa wood planks to make up each stair step. With the stair steps in place, I want to continue on and create a way for the survivors to get up from the first level to the second level. And to do this, I'm going to create a teeny tiny ladder from 2 thin pieces of balsa wood, and then I'm going to use some toothpicks to act as the ladder rungs. After putting down some double-sided tape and sticking the sides of the ladder to that, I took some of the glue and dotted the toothpick pieces and glued them to that balsa wood. I left some extra length at the top as I figured this would act as a sort of upper handle for anyone who would be climbing up the ladder. After all that's dry, I remove it from the double-sided tape and glue the little ladder to the platform. I move back to the mine entrance side of the diorama. I'm wanting to create some more pipes leading down from the oil barrel. To do this, I took some bits of old sprues and I snipped them down to size. I needed the piping to be in a unique, continuous shape. However, each piece of the sprue has an uneven end due to me snipping them. I decided to melt the tips of each pipe piece together. I'm using a lighter to melt one end, and then I quickly press that into the other sprue piece. I let that cool to a fusing hold, and then I apply a bit of hot glue, actually, to fill in the gaps. But please don't, like me, use your finger to smooth it out. You will burn yourself. After that, I quickly run the lighter all over the connecting point to smooth out everything. I also grab some plastic glue and give that a light, quick coat to the connection in order to give it a nice little melty goodness and fuse it all together. You know, the more that I look at my diorama here, the more I'm not a big fan of how boring the terrain itself is looking. I had this divot in the front part, and I decided to exaggerate that a bit more and put in a drainage pipe. Maybe the mine used to pump water out of the shaft, and this is where it was pumped out on the surface. I'm using a clear plastic tube, and I'm trimming it a bit with my hobby knife. Be careful, as this is a very sharp knife, and this could be dangerous. I then carve out some of the foam, and I dry fit the pipe before gluing that in place. Now, at this point, I've kind of jumped around different spots on the diorama, the various levels. I've messed with the landscape, but I haven't really done anything to the top level. And as I was trying to envision what this diorama was going to look like, I kind of thought it would be neat to do a sort of like communications outpost. Maybe like an old radio station where survivors have gathered here and they're maybe sending out distress signals, or they're trying to reach other survivors in the apocalypse. Starting right in, I take 2 pieces of balsa wood and I bring those together to make a corner wall. I was thinking of boxing the whole thing in, but figured that would make it hard to see what the purpose of the shack was and to see the cool details that I planned to put inside. So I ended up leaving the front and right sides open. To make the shack somewhat structurally sound, I added a wooden post to the forward corner to support that part of the roof. When you're creating a diorama or a structure that isn't necessarily real, but you want it to be realistic, or at least believable, you need to consider something called suspended disbelief. Suspended disbelief is usually talked about when creating a story or maybe in a book that is either fantastical or sci-fi or isn't necessarily set in the current real world or something that could be viable. Suspension of disbelief is the reader's, or viewers in this case, willingness to accept something that might not necessarily be realistic for the sake of enjoyment. Is it realistic that a building on a platform is easily supported by a single piece of wood? No. But by adding that beam and some other details, it becomes somewhat reasonable to the viewer, as long as you suspend some of your disbelief. As I work on this water tower that is resting on top of this thinly walled shack, I realize it doesn't make sense to have it up there. It could cause the whole structure to collapse in real life. However, it's the idea of the thing. The water tower looks cool up there, and to make this diorama look fantastical, I don't want to worry about creating a realistically, structurally sound building. I want to put a water tower on top of this tech shack in a desert diorama in the apocalypse. I guess what I'm trying to say is I personally don't always stop to enjoy the thing. I tend to analyze it, poke holes in it, see what doesn't work, and sometimes that's really nice when you're trying to create something that does look realistic or you're trying to nail down a specific look or effect on something. But it's not always meant to make perfect sense. And I think, honestly, that's the beauty of the hobby. Getting to enjoy yourself doing something that you couldn't do or see or visit in real life, and to create something that is fantastical. I was about to start adding some last details when I realized that I didn't create a way for survivors to get up to the tech shack itself. I could have made another ladder, but I already did that and I wanted to do something different. So I took out my rotary tool, and with the disc cutter attached, I carefully made a little cutout above the oil barrel, which I was envisioning would serve as a support for the stairs that I was going to be building up to the shack. Now, would you logically build stairs on top of an oil barrel? Probably not. But remember, we're suspending our disbelief. Now for the stairs themselves, I took 2 thin pieces of balsa wood to act as the sides of the stairs. I then placed steps at an equal interval along the balsa wood. After the steps were in place, I glued down the other side strip and I let the whole thing dry. I'm going to then add that to the space above the oil barrel, and the woodwork is done. For the details, I'm using some nifty 3D printed details from MyPortal Studios. It's going to sound like I'm a fangirl for this company, and it's because I am. Now, I'm not affiliated with them, nor are they sponsoring anything here or what I'm saying. However, I will say that the work that they do and the sculpts that they make are incredible. They have an overwhelming 1,300 assets in STL files that you can download and print in its entirety for a super reasonable cost, around $30 a year as of this video. They have everything from fantasy forge tools to urban city dumpsters and everything in between. And they're constantly adding new assets all the time for free. They literally have it all. Now, they have a YouTube channel, Instagram, website. I found them by accident through a Facebook ad like a year ago. So I'll have all that stuff linked down below. All the websites, all that stuff. Go follow them, go check them out, subscribe, maybe check out some of the files as well. Just let them know that Samuel sent you. I'm adding some details such as radio dishes, a generator, and some cables to really show this as a communications outpost of some sort. I have some cool control panels that I'm adding to the shack up top, and then to finish off the details, I'm going to be using some super thin wire and guitar string. This thin wire is actually an old burnt out wire from my handheld hot wire foam cutter tool. When I replaced the wire, I ended up deciding to keep this one since it makes for some awesome scale wire for projects just like this. It can be a little bit tough to work with though since it's so small, but with some tweezers I get it connected to the generator and in place among the other electronics. Now, I mentioned guitar string, and I ended up picking this handy stuff up after seeing a video by Boylai Hobby Time, who I love. He uses it in lots of his builds to replicate wires, tubing, and other interesting details. I wanted to give it a go, and I'm going to have his channel linked down in the description below so that you can check out his awesome builds and get inspired yourself. I'm also going to mention that I don't play guitar, but because I bought this on Amazon, they think I do. And now they want me to buy all sorts of guitars and related accessories. So thanks, big data and suggestion algorithms. I'm interrupting the video because I think I've royally screwed this up. I'll show you. I got too excited when I got the details and the wiring and everything on that I grabbed the primer, headed outside, and after a few passes realized that I didn't put on my terrain paste. I didn't seal the foam at all. So normally, not a big deal, but I don't put the terrain paste on just to get good, realistic looking earth texture. I do it to seal the foam and protect it against aerosols, which can melt the XPS foam that I use. So I only got a few passes in, and I think I was holding the can far enough away that I didn't do any serious damage, but I'm gonna have to go back and put the paste on, and then I will reprime everything. So we'll see, hopefully nothing bad happens. I'm gonna need to go back and apply my earth texture paste to this baddie and hope that nothing bad happens later on by doing this slightly out of order. The ground texture paste is super easy to make. I'm going to be taking some matte Mod Podge, plaster, a squirt of tan paint, some fine ballast, and a bit of water. I'm just mixing everything up to a texture like this. I'm actually going to be mixing 2 types of paste in the same container. The first I'm starting with is a thicker version so that I can cover the ground, get that good earthy layer, and fill in any cracks and crevices. Then I'm going to add some water to that container to thin it down. I'm going to apply that thinner texture to the rock wall in areas that have more texture and detail to preserve that detail. I'm going to let all of that dry for about
24 hours later.
and then once dry, I take it outside and prime the whole thing. First in black, then with a nice zenithal finish to pick out the shadows and highlights for painting. And while I could speed up the primer drying with a hairdryer, I'm going to take this time opportunity to knock out painting up some of the minis. I'm starting with my little tentacled guy here, who's one of the infected minis that I'm going to have in this diorama. I started with a base coat of refractive green by Vallejo, and once that's dry, I'm going to give the whole thing a wash of Agrax Earthshade. Since the minis that I'm going to be using this build are much smaller than normal, it's important that I pick out the details the best that I can. The wash that I just gave it is going to darken the shadows, but now I'm going to come in with my detail brush to pick out the highlights. You could just give him a dry brush, but that can sometimes give you a dusty looking end result, and I'm trying to avoid that. Now normally, you would think that a dusty effect would be a good effect to have in a desert diorama, but this little guy is going to be hanging out by this little water pipe, or maybe the mine entrance, and I wanted him to look like he was a little bit slimy. To give him a little bit of an extra slimy look, I'm going to be applying some of this Tamiya X22, which is a glossy finish, and is going to give him a little extra grossness. Moving on to the other infected mini, this guy's going to be having a more scorched look. In my mind, he's a lot slower than the other infected because of his broken, dragging foot. This is leaving him exposed to the sun and elements for much longer. I'm going to be starting with a base coat of Vallejo's Flat Brown, along with some of Sanguine Scarlet from Duncan Rhodes' Too Thin Coats paint line. I'm going for a patchy, burnt look on this mini, and to help accomplish that, I'm focusing the brown in the recesses and shadowed areas while trying to place the sanguine along the upper areas and on the raised edges, and intermixing with the other brown color. To really bring out that burnt, bloody look, I'm going to be highlighting the uppermost edges of the mini in some pure Sanguine Scarlet. This is going to really pop and complete the skin. In my mind, when this guy was still alive, he was a soldier, maybe put on the front lines to push back the infected horde. But in a valiant attempt to hold a bridge leading into a town, it was overrun and they had to blow the bridge. Debris fell, pinning the poor soldier in place and making it all too easy for the zombies to get to him. Later on, he somehow got free, and now he wanders around dragging his crushed foot behind him. Damn, Samuel. You could have just said you wanted to paint the fatigues green because he was a soldier. Now we're getting all sorts of background stories and lore? To get these fatigues all shaded up, I'm snagging some more Agrax Earthshade and hitting the fatigues only. I'm trying to leave the skin untouched as I'm pleased with how it looks right now. I'm going to be trying to get some easy shadows in all the recesses of the cloth before I highlight everything. After finishing up both of the infected minis, I'm going to be moving on to the soldiers. Now, both of these soldiers aren't ones that you would find in a country's standard military, but rather they're both survivors that have more of an on-the-go look. They have a backpack, they're both wearing different masks, and they're both carrying a different gun. I like to kind of create a sort of narrative around the minis that I put into my dioramas to help me illustrate the story and inspire my paint schemes. In my mind, these two guys ran into each other on the road and have slowly added to their look over time. The armor and clothing on both seem to be what they might have found as they have gone from place to place. This guy, I'm going to call him Pierogi because he's wearing a Russian tracksuit. Well, maybe he's Polish. I don't really know. All I know is that he wants to look stylish in the apocalypse, and this tracksuit is definitely doing it for him. Because obviously, looking good is more important than protection, especially in the apocalypse, and nothing screams fashion more than a full matching tracksuit in the desert. Come on, you guys. To wrap these survivors up, I'm adding a few bits of detail, such as the stripes on the side of Pierogi's tracksuit and an orangish brown to his gun. And for Sandy, I'm adding some green to his mask and some silver to his lenses. With my infected and survivors painted up, I am now going to move on and paint the diorama. To start, I'm going to paint up all of the vertical textured rock with some black and brown washes of thinned down acrylic paint. I'm just using Vallejo's black and flat brown. For the sandy areas, I'm hitting that with some dusty tan colors, specifically Vallejo's Iraqi sand and Citadel's Morghast bone. For the sandy area, I'm going to be dry brushing that with some of Citadel's Screaming Skull to really brighten that up and make it look extra sunny. After getting the rocks and sandy landscape painted, I'm going to be moving on to the wooden structures of the outpost. Now, it would be easy to hit everything that is wooden with some brown and call it good, but I want this structure to look like it's been kind of cobbled and pieced together over time, maybe by a few different survivors. To help convey this, I'm utilizing a few different colors that I'm going to be using randomly across all of the wooden pieces, namely Vallejo's wood grain, buff, orange-brown, and flat earth. I would also occasionally apply a wash of Agrax Earthshade over some of the colors to give that some added variety. I'm also going to apply some of the Agrax Earthshade to unpainted pieces of wood to get yet another color of wood. After getting all of the wood painted, I'm going to focus on the other details, which happen to mostly be made of metal. And similar to how I did the wood, I want to use a handful of different metallic colors instead of just one. I'm going to be breaking out my Pro Acryl metallic line and using a number of their paints to get the perfect metallic detail colors that I need. If you're interested in seeing these paints in action where I test them out on a Hydra, check out the video in the upper right hand corner, and I'll have it linked down in the description below as well. I hit the pipes, barrels, wires, and other metal details with a few different colors including dark silver and bronze. Also, because this is an apocalyptic desert outpost, I added some chipping, weathering, and other distressed effects to make everything look a little bit more worn down. With the metallic details done, I hit any remaining details such as the generator, the satellite dishes, and the spotlight. After the last few details are painted up, I'm going to be adding the water, adding the minis, and then calling this bad boy done. While this is a desert, I want to have a little water feature here. My thought is that the pipe coming out of the ground is an outlet for the mine pumping water out. I thought it could act as a sort of oasis in this dry scene. I'm going to be using Mod Podge Dimensional Magic for the water, but first I dam the side of my diorama off with some tape, but before pouring the Dimensional Magic, I take some PVA glue and I glue the seam where the tape meets the foam to stop any potential leaks. Then, I simply squeeze out some of the Dimensional Magic, tease the edges with a toothpick to get rid of any rounding and to get it in all the nooks and crannies, and then I just let it dry. While that's drying, I'm going to place my minis in the diorama. Then, when everything's dried and cured, I'm going to paint the sides up black and call this one done. This was such a fun build, and I think that it turned out nicely. The only thing that I'm not sure about is if it looks like it's in the desert. Does it look like that to you? Let me know down in the comments below. Thanks for sticking around until the end, you guys. I really appreciate it. If you liked the video, be sure to give it a like, and if you're enjoying the channel, I would love it if you would consider subscribing. We just recently crossed the 800 subscriber milestone, which is more than I thought I'd ever get, but we're on the road to 1,000, and so there's no better time to join the Minecraft fam, and we would love nothing more than for you to join. I've got some really fun projects in the pipeline, so until next time, keep on crafting.